Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. We have put you on mute because there's a fair number of us here. And the topic today is all about feedback. We've called it Feedback the Game Changer, and we tend to take a different topic every month within Actus. And so we decided February is the month for feedback. It's a topic that we haven't necessarily covered before and seems to be really, really topical. For those of you who don't know me, clearly I know there's some familiar names, so some of you do, but there are some names I don't recognise. So as I've been called out by Peter, we've had too many years in corporate learning and development roles. I'm also, for my sins, a chartered psychologist, and my day job is founder and CEO of Actus Performance, Talent and Learning, and that's the remit that I have behind the scenes in terms of what I do. Any of my contact details you can see here. I host the HR Uprising podcast, and we also have a LinkedIn group. So if you've not come across that, we'll be dropping some links into the chat on that, or you can just get the links. We'll send these slides out to you later. So anyone who wants any of this content to use within their team, we'll be able to provide you with that. So just to share, in case you haven't come across Actus, so Actus, we position ourselves as a complete performance learning and a talent and learning suite. So we've enhanced our functionality. We started out as performance management, but we now also support talent management, learning management, compliance, onboarding, and we're really focusing on 360. So this topic's really relevant, and I will mention new product towards the end that we're launching shortly, which is our product called 360 Now. The other thing we do, because my background when I was in HR was actually I was very much in the learning and development space. So we also run virtual training and consultancy. So should you need any of that in the change management sphere or in the virtual or hybrid management training, I do quite a lot of that myself. And I also have other associates who do lots of that with us. So what are we going to talk about today? What's the topic? The topic is why feedback is so important in a hybrid world. So just exploring that. I mean, feedback, I think many of us would say that feedback is actually really important, particularly if you are in a learning role, because how else do we learn and develop? But why is it even more important at the moment? We'll look at different types of feedback. We'll look at some feedback models. I dare say there's people out there who can share other feedback models and probably run this webinar in terms of aspects. So we'll remind ourselves of some of the essential aspects of feedback. I'd love to hear some from you in the chat as well about what we often find if you're new to these webinars. We often find that some really good information sharing in the chat. So thanks to you who are repeat visitors. Often we can get some really good chat and sharing of ideas. And one of the ideas that I'll ask for your feedback on later is how can we really create a feedback culture in our organisation? And I mean a constructive feedback culture. So that's something that I think is quite important for us to think about if we are in a people role. We'll touch on the role of 360-degree feedback, if that's something you're interested in. And actually, I'm doing another webinar on that towards the end of the month, focusing in on that because it's quite a specific topic. And as I mentioned there, talking about developing a positive feedback culture. So as I like to try and get it a little bit interactive because it is lunchtime. We're moving into that graveyard slot, aren't we? So keeping everybody awake. So in a moment, I'm going to put a poll up to give you an idea, to give you an indication of your feedback culture, I guess, in the organisation that you are associated with. So you may work within it, or maybe if you are independent, then you could choose one of the organisations that you work with, or overall summarise what you'd say it is. So interested to say, and it's anonymous. Oh, hang on, that's not the right one. Hang on, stop. That's not right. Get the right poll up for you. Tell me about feedback in your organisation. So interested to know what you think the culture is of feedback in your organisation. Would you actually say it's a bit of a feedback vacuum? People are really often have got plenty to say about why what people are doing wrong, but they don't actually provide them with that feedback directly. If someone said, oh, I'm going to give some feedback, or I need to have feedback, or we should do feedback, do people get nervous about it, expect it to be negative? Do they see it as and assume that it's going to be a negative? Do you have that there are some enlightened managers, sorry about my typo there, there's a C in there, so some enlightened managers are actually really quite good, and they're doing it positive and developmental feedback, so they're role modeling it. Would you say that if it does happen, and by the way, you can, I think, can you just collect one, or you can only do one, you've got to choose one. Does it only happen in formal occasions? So people save it all up to the appraisal, or when there's a formal thing? Or do you have an organisation that's really mature and actually is very, very good at that feedback, and it happens naturally? And if you do have that, we'd love to hear how that's established and what that looks like. So I've got half of you have a chance to participate. As I say, I don't know who said what. It just is interesting for you to get a sense of how you fit or how it fits within your organisation. And I will give you a few more moments. You're up to 70% participation. So I just give 5 more seconds for anyone else who wants to select one of these. And that's great. And in a minute, while I share, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question before the question on my next slide. What is it that interested you about this webinar? What is it that you're interested in, you want to discuss, or you'd like to come up with? And if you've got any questions relating to this topic, did you just come along because you quite like to join the webinars, or is there something specific about feedback? And I'll share the poll and see whether that links into your reasons as to why you're here. So sharing it. So what we're seeing here is that actually most of you are saying that feedback is happening to a large degree, and actually 12% of you actually feel got quite a mature culture, so really interested in that. But half of you are saying, almost half of you are saying, it rarely happens outside of appraisal, formal and 360 development. So with that in case, so Catherine, thanks so much for posting up there. You're saying you're looking to improve your feedback culture. Could you give us a little bit more information on that? You can unmute if you want, or you put it in the chat. Just what does that mean? So where is it at the moment, or what would make it better? I'm interested in that. And anyone else? You've unmuted, Catherine.
Okay, I guess I'm interested in hearing what would make it better. But where we're at the moment, I selected one of the rarely happens outside the appraisal. The appraisal is seen as a very negative experience. It's very much a tick box exercise, and we're actually looking to reframe our performance management into much more a development thinking tool. And we think feedback is absolutely fundamental to that. But where you have quite a traditional culture, you've probably got a mixture of people expect feedback to be negative. It doesn't happen outside the appraisal, and it's usually loaded because it's going to affect my bonus. All of that good stuff that we've somehow got to start on a journey to unpick.
That's great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much for giving us some. It's so much richer if we can get that context. And actually, it's really interesting. I think you've got other people who are probably in that thinking, Mike, sounds like you might think that's something that's similar in your own. I guess that looks like you've got a similar comment there. Jessica, we'll come to 360 later, and that actually can be one of the tools that can help. Depends on how you use it. Diane's talking about effective feedback. I like that term, work on effective feedback. Diane, do you want to tell me in the chat what would effective be when you're working on it? It'd be useful to know. So just in the interest of time, I'll keep going because it'd be great actually to chat this through with more of you going forwards. But just picking up on Catherine and Mike's points, you are absolutely right. And many of us, I guess, are what we're saying. So you've got feedback in the organisation. It's got linked into the appraisal, which we know that loads of people find to be painful. And it can seem to be tick boxy, so people are going through the motions. And I think that's one of the things that can make feedback seem insincere, or if you're having to link it to a performance related pay. So then almost like managers have got to be really careful and hedge their bets in terms of almost evidencing down behaviours. There's I've mentioned this on, I've done a few webinars, historic webinars, and perhaps we can put it in the links that go out, about a performance management cycle which incorporates more ongoing conversations and development conversations. And one of the learnings from that, it was in a CIPD paper that came out about 3 or 4 years ago called Could Do Better. What they showed was that people are not always honest in feedback. You'd think they would be, but actually they found that when people thought that they were providing feedback which was going to link to people's either their career outcomes or their pay or reward, they were much more cautious. They were much less likely to be honest or to give constructive or developmental feedback. or they might be very critical. So whereas they said that if people thought it was just purely for people's development, so growth mindset type stuff, then there was more honesty. So it's interesting, isn't it? So feedback isn't always objective. That's something that's very true. And when we look at 360s, we have to caveat those things. Great, Diane, you're using the SBI, Situation Behaviour Impact Model, using it more and getting just people to have that model, giving them that confidence and the skill to do it. Yeah, Colin, people can feel defensive, can't they? It's interesting, isn't it? They accept the positive, tend not to agree with the negatives. Does everybody have that experience? Because I've also had the experience, Colin, where people almost seek out the negatives and don't hear the positives. So I don't know if that's cultural or individual. I think that's quite an interesting observation. But certainly we are biased in terms of how we seek feedback and how we listen to it. So all of those are really useful context, and thank you very much for sharing those. And I'll try and draw into them as much as possible to go through this. And please keep on using the chat and ask questions and comment as we go through. I've got one more question for you in the chat. So why would you think that feedback is an important thing anyway? Many of us would think it's important in terms of development and growing, but why do you think it's increasingly important or particularly important in this hybrid environment that we find ourselves in? What are your thoughts on that as to why it might be even more important at the moment? I'll give it a moment because I know there's always a little bit of a delay for the chat to catch up. Totally, Elise, I think so, because we can't see people, and line managers, let's say it is your PDR, this could make people even more cynical because they might think, I haven't even seen my line manager, how on earth can they give me feedback at the end of the annual appraisal when they haven't had any contact with me and seen me at all? Definitely, Annabelle, it's about building those relationships and with our team, and because we're not seeing people so much and we're in a hybrid setup, then how can we get that sense of how we're going? If you think about it exactly as Catherine's saying, we're not getting enough informal feedback. When you're in an office environment, you are kind of getting feedback all the time, even though you might not notice it. So whether people make eye contact with you, whether they ask you for whether you could help them with something, just generally, if there's a little bit of chit chat, you're getting sort of non-verbal cues all the time, which might be feedback about how you feel about yourself, that you're helpful or friendly or useful, have value add, or even that you're doing something wrong. Things could get corrected and you could be helped more quickly in a face-to-face environment. And of course, we don't have that at the moment. So we've got lack of daily interaction, which means that we do need to keep people on track much more so than we used to potentially, because some things would have been picked up more so. So all of those points I agree with you put there. Thank you for those. So virtual working has removed informal feedback sources, and the reality of a hybrid environment means that we're not going to automatically get those. In some places, you still may never see certain people and continue to work virtually with them, because many people will be going in certain days of the week, which may not coincide with ours. In terms of managers, going back to the PDR, if people were cynical about appraisal and PDRs before, they could well be even more cynical now because their managers don't have an objective view of their performance. There's also something about, there's concerns raised about proximity bias. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term. I had to think about it, but it's obvious when you think about it. So if you are in a hybrid setup, there's some concerns by those who are in every day, let's say with the line manager, who have the chance to chat about the football and build a relationship, compared to those people who are working remotely 100% of the time or don't have that daily contact, and whether or not they're disadvantaged in terms of their career opportunities or even the perception of their performance just because you don't have that closeness. So having feedback from others that we're working with is going to be really helpful balance in terms of appraisals. Retention, the other thing, if we think about things like 360, which I'll go into later, where feedback is used as a developmental tool, where people can really get a rich sense of what their skills and capabilities are, then it's a really useful tool for developing people. And if people feel personally developed, they are less likely to move on. And we know that there is a bit of a crisis in terms of recruitment at the moment and retaining talent. And the other thing I think it's useful for is just to keep a temperature check on culture. So it could be, you could use feedback, this doesn't have to be individual, like a 360 feedback, it could be survey feedback, or it could be if you've got values that you want to roll through the organisation or see whether those values are being lived, you could make sure that you've got questions which relate to the extent to which people are modelling the behaviours associated with a positive culture in your organization. Because of course, depending on what the feedback is that you're looking at, depending what the feedback topic is, whether it's more to do with a project or whether it's to do with skills, competencies or values, so behavioral, then you could ask specific questions which will give you a sense of where the culture is and help move it on in the right direction and get a sense it's going in the right way. The interesting thing about the negative ones is also, just to the point made earlier by, was it Colin, that in certain cultures that I have worked in, I'm thinking where people would get defensive about things, you can, it's almost like feedback. There was an organisation I worked with which had a bit of a bullying and harassment culture. And in those circumstances, people wouldn't take any developmental feedback. They would perceive that to be bullying. It's a bigger problem. It's a sign of a bigger problem. People were not open to develop, and that's perhaps to do with the way in which they'd had quite a command and control environment. And it wasn't a nurturing environment. So actually, people's response to feedback can give you an indication as to the culture of the organisation as well. And of course, when people get defensive, well, it's actually quite a natural response. If we look to neuroscience, neuroscience tells us that actually saying to somebody, let me give you some feedback, or can I give you some feedback? And if I said that, can I give you some feedback, Ricky, Fraser, Mike? It gives you a bit of a feeling, even if you know and trust that person, you get a bit of a feeling in your stomach. It's the vagus nerve, I think, where you actually have that threat. It's your fight or flight response. So it's quite interesting that from a brain point of view, that feedback from somebody, we can interpret it as a risk. Now, I don't exactly know why that is, but what I do think is that it's to do with learned behaviour. And it's probably to do with the fact that generally it's been more negative feedback. We don't have maybe don't have a culture or experience of more positive reinforcement. And that would play into these other points that there is absolute evidence that managers or working with people in an environment where they get positive feedback, we get constructive, catching people doing things right feedback, that will actually help people have self-belief, and that will actually increase performance. So they'll have greater belief in themselves. And managers who demonstrate a growth mindset, and growth mindset is a bit of a jargon word, but essentially they're someone who's not looking for blame, and they are looking for finding you doing things right and thinking, okay, so how could you make that even better, as opposed to how can you put something right that you did wrong. So even if someone has got a long way to grow, it's about recognizing what they're achieving so far and always looking about how you can improve it, as opposed to focusing on what's wrong and believing that people can't improve. So Mike's comment here is, it does depend on the person giving the feedback. Do you trust their judgment? Yes, I agree with you. And actually, there was a great paper on that, which had more on neuroscience. It does, there is something about how much you trust those people. There are other things that play into your brain's likelihood to accept feedback. And it's about whether it affects your sense of self. It's about there was something to do with core. There was an acronym for it. I have to dig it out, but that was something, Mike, that if you respect that judgment, now that's an interesting one, because you can actually mean that someone you respect, depending if you are, let's say, in a hierarchical culture, so someone's senior, that doesn't mean that they have a more objective insight, does it? So sometimes they could do more damage. So that's where also feedback, we have to be quite careful and make sure that people who are respected are able to provide feedback in a responsible way. Ooh, what feedback would we suggest to say rather than can I give you some feedback? Now that's Fraser's put that out to everybody, and I'll come back with some thoughts on it, but I'd love to hear what other people would say about that. Do we say, can I give you some feedback? What could you say instead of that? No, so Colin, you can give 9 positives to a person that have difficulty accepting 1 negative. Interestingly, is that other people's experience? Do other people have that experience with Colin? Because I don't think I do. It may depend on the cultures that I worked with, and I don't know where you work, Colin. So I think that's intriguing as to who you're thinking about. Are you thinking about one person, one organisation, or everybody you work with, Colin? That would be my question. What thoughts do others have in terms of Colin and Fraser's points here? I'll come on to those in a moment. Actually, let's just have a little look at the chat, because the question I'm going to ask next is what constitutes good quality feedback, and that does fit into one of these points here. So Peter's saying it's about the intention of the person is crucial. So it's about being beneficial to the recipient and not about the ego of the giver. And that comes through, doesn't it, in non-verbally. So that's an interesting point there. So actually, Colin, you know, if someone takes something negative, and maybe that in fact is even the problem, is the term negative, as opposed to it would be even better if this is something else that you could do. And actually, if you want to help someone, you probably wouldn't couch your feedback as negative. It would be, you know, I noticed that you did something particularly well, and it would be even better if. And we'll look at a model later in terms of how to do that there. So intention, I agree with, because I think that comes over in terms of whether people are going to trust you. And it is about respect with others. And maybe it's about that other person's emotional state. How do they feel about it? So we haven't had any amazing responses yet to what to say rather than giving you feedback. One observation that I will make, Fraser, is I used to work with a trainer, and she would always at the end of a session say, can I have some feedback? She would always request feedback, which I always felt quite awkward for myself. I had to really learn to work my feedback muscle. But then it became natural. Then if I'd done that, say, oh, do you want to give me some feedback? And then over time, you became more comfortable with it, and you realized that feedback didn't have to be that scary, particularly if it's delivered well. And maybe that is the issue. Maybe that's the issue, Colin, in terms of the experience of the people you're working with, that they haven't had it delivered constructively and well. And we'll go into that stage now. So if we're talking about delivering good quality feedback, and I know Diane's out there been doing the SBI model, and I've got a variation of that in a moment. This is probably really basic, but tell me in the chat, guys, what would be, if you were to define, you're in a training course about feedback, what is good quality feedback? What would we say good quality feedback is? Who can tell me? Give me some adjectives that would be used to describe good quality feedback. Okay, Mike, that's so saying so the negative is negative emotions are weighted more heavily than positive ones, so it flows through. So that's why people have emotional responses to it. And they feel threatened by it, clearly, as in it goes more to this fight or flight response. So we've got here objective, Annabelle said constructive, definitely. Specific, we've got from Diane and Elise, which I really agree with. Future focused, yes, I guess, Peter, that's a really helpful one, because that's meaning it's how you can be better as opposed to what you did wrong in the past, which you can't change. Clear, yeah, Diane, I think specific, clear. Timely, we want it to be timely because it's really unhelpful to find out something that you did wrong a year ago. And that's one of the problems about feedback being stored up to an appraisal. People might go, well, why didn't you tell me that months ago? I could have fixed it. Leaning towards development says there, and it's about helping people understand how to improve. Absolutely, I agree with all of those. So some of them, you've got some extra ones there, which is great. Specific and timely, we've got constructive and objective as well. So it's being constructive as in being helpful and future focused and something you can do in future. Habitual is one that I would suggest, and it links into the filling of the bucket. Does anyone know where my filling of the bucket acronym comes from? Actually, I'm going to have to ask myself, trying to remember the book that it comes from. It's gone out of my head. It comes from a book, a positive psychology book. There, but habitual is really about creating the habit of feedback, and this is maybe if we're in roles as people professionals that we can help others, this is something we can help enable. So the filling the bucket is really about helping organizations create the habit of it. So it was by the book, it was by Donald Clifton, who's all about the Americans, is from the American Psychology Society, and he was one of the founders of positive psychology, which is the term of it. And the book's name will come to me. And if someone can tell me, it's called, I have to check my notes. How full is your bucket? There you go. It wasn't that hard to think of, was it? Simply put, the concept of how full is your bucket was saying that everyone, if anyone's ever done Stephen Covey's 7 Habits, it's very similar to the emotional bank account. So the idea is we've all got buckets that need filling up with positives. And maybe over time there might be a hole in your bucket and some of them leak out if you haven't got relationships with people. But the reality is, if we feel positive about ourselves, we've already got some sand in our bucket, or we've got some positive emotions in our emotional bank account with another person. If they then need to give us some feedback which is developmental or criticism, but maybe if it's developmental is the way in which it's worded as opposed to negative, then it doesn't damage us so much because we've already got credits in the bank account or sand in the bucket. Whereas if we're in an environment which is a bit of a feedback vacuum, or you only have feedback at certain times of the year, there's no positive recognition or positives that are building up the credits. So when we get something which is a perceived negative, even if it's well meant, it has much more of a negative impact on people than others. Absolutely, it's the glass half empty or bucket half full. The point is really is if we've got credits or we're already half full because we're in an environment where we're receiving regular positives, then it's much easier to take something that's a perceived negative. And the metrics they talked about was actually you potentially needed 5 positives for every 1 negative. And that would probably play into Michael's point about the brain. And perhaps that's to do with the fact that the brain resonates more with a negative. It triggers the fear response. So to build the trust where we don't initiate that fear response, we need to have 5 positive experiences with that individual where we've had helpful, supportive feedback, and that makes us less likely to respond negatively to something that's more critical. So those are the things there, and I think that's an interesting comment in terms of thinking about the bucket. Again, the same trainer that I used to deliver training with, she used to recite an adage which I thought was quite useful, which was about managers trying to get into the habits of feedback, and this maybe plays into us trying to create feedback cultures. So when we learn how to give positive feedback, one particular manager, back in the day when we were all face-to-face, would have 3 safety pins or 3 paper clips, sorry, in her left pocket. She'd go out and make a point of trying to give some positive feedback, catch people doing things right, in the words of another really old business book, The 1 Minute Manager, catch people doing things right. And every time she did that, she'd move one of those paper clips over to the other pocket. So at the end of the day, if all her paper clips were in her left pocket, she hadn't given any recognition or positivity. She'd move them all over, then she'd achieved something for the day. So then if you need to give someone something more critical, then she felt better able to do it. What we can do in a virtual environment, you could have post-its on one side of the screen and move them to the other. It's how do we basically practice or build up those positive feedback muscles so that then when we have to give developmental feedback, it doesn't feel so damning to people. So styles of feedback, there's a few slides here that I'm going to go through relatively rapidly, more because they might be useful for you. Some of you will know these already, and it's more about how you give feedback. This model, I think, is quite a useful one for just thinking about the balance of feedback and how it goes over to people. And actually, you could give feedback in any of these ways. So if you thought about what different feedback is and what the impact of it is, then it's helpful to think, well, what do I need to change about the way I deliver feedback? So, I mean, if I was to give some general positive feedback, I could just go, great job, well done. Now, if I say great job or well done to you, how does that make you feel? Is that good feedback? It's positive. So how does that make you feel? What's the impact of me saying great job? Even if I do sound a little bit American, though. How do you feel if you got that? And I'll get you to think about that as each of these. So I'll go through this relatively rapidly because I'm not doing this as sort of management training program. So people might respond like that in general positive, or I might just go a little bit further and say, actually, I listened into you on that call with the customer and they asked some really tricky questions, which you broke down, you asked some clarifying questions and you answered them very, very clearly. You then also offered to follow up to provide them with additional information on the points that you weren't clear. I thought that gave a really good customer service, and they seemed to be very happy with what it was that, very happy with the answers that you gave. Well done or great job. So that was more specific, right? I was more specific about what exactly it was that they did right. What's the impact of me doing that? Now, going down to the developmental, and notice we've called it developmental or corrective as opposed to negative, because that's very much trainer speak, future focused, improving. So if I was specific developmental, I listened into that customer call that we had the other week. And I noticed that the customer asked a number of questions that you didn't actually answer. And there were a few occasions when I think you interrupted them and cut them off when they were mid-sentence. So what it might be better for you to do is actually just slow down a little bit and just check you fully understand things by reflecting back to them what it is that they're saying. So words to that effect, you can see where I'm going with it. So that's more developmental feedback. Now, what I'm saying there is I'm telling them something specifically that didn't go as well. The tone of voice is still quite neutral, but I'm feeding it back in terms of what they could do, future focus it, what would be even better. So I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it was terrible, but I'm saying, you know, this is what happened. The impact, ideally, you talk about the impact. The impact was that they didn't seem to understand or looked confused, and then you can play it back to them. Or general developmental. Now, who feels like they're going back to school here? If I went general developmental, it would be could try harder or could do better. Any of you remember those for school reports? So general developmental. So if I was to ask you now, who can find annotations? Let's see if you can find annotations. It's a little, it'll be in more dots on your Zoom screen. If you're close enough to be able to do this, find your annotations. Tell me, if you could only have feedback in one quadrant for the rest of your days, which quadrant would it be? And put a cross in that quadrant for me. So we've got general positive, specific developmental, and general developmental. So well done. Elisa's found the annotations. So it's annotation for me is on the bottom bar. It's got a little pen or pencil next to it. And you can do stamps or little crosses. That's it, or finding it now. Or it might be at the top of your screen. And again, there's little dots. So let's see where we are. Interesting what the pattern is building up. So a few more people want to have a go here. So as those crosses come up, so what I am seeing is what's really normal when I've run this in a training course is that so far everybody's going on the right hand side. So we're saying that we want specific feedback. So if there's one thing that we need to teach an organisation, it's how to be specific. So we want specific feedback, and actually quite a lot of you, in fact the majority, are saying I'd like specific developmental. So isn't that interesting? We actually want to know how to do better. But we want it to be delivered in a way that's constructive and positive and with a growth mindset, as opposed to negative and critical. And again, that does make me think, going back to Colin's points earlier, is, you know, how can we couch something in a way that does come over positively for people and is taken constructively and developmental. So if I was say, going back to the point about could I give some feedback, I might say, so should we debrief that? Should we look at the lessons learned? Shall we reflect on how that call went? That would be the sort of thing that I would say, let's chat through what worked, what we would change in future. So I'm using the words we, as opposed to do you want some feedback? But I would say that let's chalk it through, let's reflect on it. It's probably what I would say to somebody before doing feedback. I would also probably get them to say, and I would probably say, what do you think went well? And what would you change? So if I was going to provide feedback, that's generally what I would do in a sort of coaching style, rather than let me give you some feedback. And then I might say, okay, may I give you some feedback? Let's say I've got their views out first. So you can see from the screen, guys, that actually everyone who's responded here would prefer to have specific. And we know that actually being specific is something that people are not necessarily so good at. And that the majority of people have gone for specific developmental. So clearly it's about how we deliver it, as opposed to, as opposed to the way in which the fact that we don't want developmental, certainly for this group here, but then you might all be just very, very enlightened because you're on a webinar to learn. Diane mentioned that she's using the SBI model of contact feedback with her team, which makes sense. SBI is situation, behavior, impact, really nice model. This is a model, SIR model, which we use, and it's a similar sort of principle, but it's actually just saying the point is being specific about the behavior. So you would get the context, you're specific about the behavior. So you would say, I noticed when you're on that call, so you do need that situation anyway. So you say something that you saw, I noticed, I heard, or when you said. You talk about the impact, which is also in the SBI model, which is SBI is situation, behavior, impact. This is specific feedback about the behavior, impact. And then the recommend or explore bit here is fitting into a coaching where you might ask them to come up with some suggestions, or what do you think you could have done differently? So I noticed you spoke to the customer, she looked confused. What do you think you might do differently next time? So this is all about growth mindset, encouraging people to think, or next time you might want to do it the same, more frequently, or differently. So just another model, the sort of thing you could encourage people. And I would really encourage people to use these models also with recognition, right? So the positive stuff. So quite often recognition, people go, oh, that was great, well done. And we give really general recognition. We mean well, but the value of the specific positive is so much more. And if we go back to our bucket, let's say it's putting much more sand in. If you make the effort to be specific about what someone did really well, it fills things up better, and means that there's more trust in that bank account for you to be able to say when things could be done differently. So here's just an example here. And isn't that more powerful? You go, and actually, so just, it's definitely worth repeating. Keep on doing what you're doing, but being really specific about what it is. It's interesting. You look at, I've worked with salespeople, for example, sometimes everything's working for them, then suddenly it stops working. And the reason is because they don't actually know what they were doing right in the first place. So helping people to recognize what they're doing right is really powerful. The same model here. So that's situation, impact, result. This could be one here where you're actually exploring getting them to problem solve with you. So same example, situation, the data tables were lacking references or explanations. This meant it was quite difficult to understand the context and appreciate the full meaning of the data. What do you think you could do differently, or what ideas do you have on how we could address that impact? You're basically relating to the impact, and then you might make a recommendation. So you can be consultative, you don't have to be tell or directive. All right, so that was looking at sort of the general concept of feedback. And I'm keeping an eye on the chat. I'm just aware of time as well, guys. So I'll come back to the chat. Do keep using the chat. Thank you very much. So 360 feedback, that is another type of feedback, isn't it? And it's quite specific, and it helps businesses be specific. So who has experienced 360 feedback? Let's pop the poll up and see what your levels of knowledge are with it. Up to 70%, so I'll just give 5 seconds for anyone else who wants to respond. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, share the results. So quite a lot of you haven't experienced it. So at my next slide, I will show them because it talks about what it is. Quite a number of you have experienced it and found it really powerful. And quite a number of you have experienced it and were underwhelmed. So if you thought it was powerful, tell us what was good about it. And if you were underwhelmed, tell us what wasn't good about it. Let us know in the chat and get some insights there. And for those of you, while those who have experienced it are popping those in the chat, let me run through my slide. For those of you who haven't experienced it, let me explain what it is. So in fact, that's a picture on my next slide, doesn't have the pictures. That's a picture of a feed on this slide I'm on now, is a picture of a 360 report, which typically would have, so I've still got annotations live on my thing. It would typically have graphical feedback. So if you've got categories here, it might have a nice little spider graph like we have here. And that spider graph is showing the difference of categories of response. So in that image there, it's a leadership program. You can see here that the categories were leadership, performance management, motivating others. So it's obviously a management tool. And different categories of person have responded to this individual. So let's say it's me, it's 360 feedback about my abilities, or people's perception of my abilities in those areas. The report then generates this spider graph, which categorizes the high level categories. So leadership, for example, under which there would have been a number of questions that have been asked. And then that graph was showing that, let's say the red is my manager, the yellow might be my opinion, blue might be my colleagues, and green could be my customers. So you have different categories of respondents, and you can have different categories of question. And it's quite interesting. And this will be particularly interesting, I think, in a hybrid environment where there are people that you're working with virtually and there's people that you don't see. So having different categories of respondents could help give insight into how we're being perceived by these different types of people and the different environments that we now work in. I mean, you always had different categories which are based on relationship, but now it could be different based on the environment that we're in. So 360 feedback I'd explain as being usually quantitative, so graphical, where people are scoring a number against an actual question, and qualitative feedback on an individual's behaviours or performance usually against specific criteria. So the criteria would be competencies or behaviours or values. So questions aligned with behavioural statements. So that, which my head's now gone blank on behavioural statements, so I'll come back to those. So say communication style, someone communicates openly and honestly, or someone speaks fluently or uses a variety of media to communicate, those type of things. So you'd have behavioural statements that people would rate. The feedback's from a number of sources. It would be comparative based on role. Usually, or ideally, I recommend that responses are anonymised unless they're from the line manager. I think it builds more trust. Some organisations, I realise, don't. They actually make them identifiable. The purpose is really about objectivity. Obviously, there's no such thing as objectivity, really. Everyone is still subjective, but because you are getting a collective viewpoint, it makes it more objective. So if you get 5 people who are direct reports responding, then it's the overall pattern of response. It starts to iron out any anomalies. It's a really powerful tool, used well, in my opinion, to develop self-awareness and growth, but it's also a really dangerous tool. And that's why I'm going to take a look in the chat at where some people were underwhelmed or had bad experiences, but others have used it really powerfully. And I talked about that being honest earlier. So let's have a look. Was there anything here that came through in terms of your experience? Might say a suggestion about moving forwards. So anyone else, you guys who said you were underwhelmed, tell me why in the chat if you can, or if you found it powerful, give us a little bit more, because I can't see any insights here that relate directly to that. What was it that you weren't sure about? Was it poorly delivered? Was it wrong kind of people? Was it different to what we're talking about here? Was it actually 360 feedback? Because that's an interesting one. Not everybody understands what they mean. Mike, I totally agree. Where the value of it is, though, it really can work very well in terms of leadership. So how it fits best, in my opinion, I think it works very well for senior leader development supported by coaching. And that's what Mike's saying there. It gives feedback to more senior staff, absolutely. It helps them see their shadow. It shows that they're open to the impact of them, and it's safe as well, because you normally do it one-to-one. I personally believe you should not roll 360 feedback out in an organisation without them being prepared to invest in one-to-one feedback, because they need to digest it. So it's not something to give to everybody. It's something that needs to be managed really carefully. So when I was in-house, we would run it as internal coaches and do a cycle with people. If they were, let's say, senior managers, you'd work with them, maybe someone new into a role, maybe someone on a development program to develop them up to the next role. So I think it's where it fits there is for leadership development with support with coaching, for measuring or embedding new values or competencies. It's also useful if you wanted to assess a number of things for career development, because what you would do is you make sure that the questions related to that role that someone's going for, so that aspirational role, and they could have questions as to how they're performing against those requirements now, and then you could see the gap. Also used to measure return on investment in a training program. So that's where I would say it fits quite nicely. If you want to know more about 360 feedback, the webinar that I'm doing at the end of the month focuses in on that specifically, how to run a 360 program effectively, how to deliver 360 feedback. So there'll be more resources on that if that's something you're looking to do. So almost there, guys. Sorry, I realise I'm going on a bit. Donna's saying what you didn't like about yours, the questions were generic and not specific. Yes, and maybe not relevant to the role. It really doesn't work at all if you end up having questions that aren't relevant to the role or the people can't respond to. So that makes sense, Donna. So that's a good learn, isn't it? If you're ever involved in 360, make sure that the questions being asked are relevant to that person's current role or their aspirational role, so you can see the point. Okay, so you got some useful feedback, Elise, about your communication style. It's good about demonstrating you're open to it. Yeah. Okay, Catherine, another one. Yes, so where it's used in a culture where people were not prepared. I've seen it go both ways on that. So people were just really nice and nothing constructive. So they just say lovely, fluffy stuff because they're scared. That also is why I think it should be anonymous, because you want people to be honest. I've also seen it where people say critical things. ROI stands for return on investment, Erica. Good question. Apologies for the jargon. So if you are an internal learning and development person, you need to make a business case to spend money on a training course and say the reason we should do this is it's going to take people's competence and skills from point A to point B. then it's quite useful then to measure where they are at the start of the program. And then let's say it's an 18-month program, it's quite a long one, then you could measure them again at the end. And if you can show that people's skills have improved, then that would demonstrate that the money that your business spent on that program delivered a change. So it demonstrates impact. Yeah, and Colin, I agree with that. That's one of the downsides of 360. You've got to be careful, and that's why 360 feedback. So I think Colin's saying that feedback that people receive from others can be a projection. It doesn't necessarily mean it's about you. It could well be more of a reflection of that person's perception, or of them. It could be their problem. You know, we've all been with people where actually, you know, it's their problem. So that's something to be aware of, and that's why I believe 360 feedback should be supported by coaching. So if you're an independent consultant, maybe you wrap around some one-to-one coaching, which is why you shouldn't do it as blanket. You should do it in small cohorts, and probably go top down. So thoughts about a feedback culture. Those of you who've got it, there are a few of you said you're in quite a mature feedback cultures already. So what is it that works there? How is that? How do you recognize that? What thoughts are there? How can we encourage growth mindsets in our organizations, given that it's even more important than it's ever been in a hybrid environment? These are my ideas. I'd love to see any other ideas in the chat. I would start by trying to embed recognition processes and systems. So start by trying to get people to be positive. So start with building trust and getting people to catch people doing things right. I would also do, which I think Diane said she's doing, train people how to deliver specific feedback, because that's what people find really hard. Often they just can't even see what a specific behavior is. So they don't understand how to provide specific feedback. So just train and help people and practice it. Introduce concepts of growth mindset / psychological safety, or as I've thrown that one in at the end, psychological safety, where people feel able to be themselves, able to seek feedback. They don't have to hide anything. Make sure we get away from this blame culture. So blame culture is where people perceive that it's negative feedback. It should always be about growth and supporting someone to grow with positive intent. If you're going to roll out 360, roll it out top down, because it is about leadership. And those leaders will be the people who will be the managers commenting on the next person down's feedback form. And I have seen 360 introduced in the middle of an organization, and the people at the top didn't understand what they were responding to, and that their responses would stand out, and it was quite damaging. So roll it out top down. And any ideas and things, you know, where people come up with ideas, recognize that, encourage people to stand up and share those ideas. So that's my thoughts in feedback. I hope you found it useful. Thank you so much for being so active in the chat. If you want to hear more about our 360 Now tool, which has been designed for this, we have now got a 360 tool. As we said, it's got to be used with caution, but we've built it in a way which supports that. So if you want to know more about 360 and introducing it in your organization, then just let us know. In fact, I'll put it up on the poll. You can let us know. We'll get in touch with you. I'll let you know. I'm going to start doing some open webinars on it, and we've got some full information on 360, and this can provide people with support. I'll just pop up the other webinars that are coming up as well. So you can let me know. Up there's the final poll to make it easy. If anyone wants to wants any follow-up, then let us know what you'd like follow-up. You can choose more than one option. The next webinar is 7 steps to running a successful 360 feedback process. So it's quite a practical one. If you are thinking of rolling it out, that's on 21st of Feb, and those are our next few webinars coming up. You can always go to the webinar page, and there'll be further resources coming out. And actually, we're just working on a feedback topic sheet. So whether that'll be ready for tomorrow, but that will be coming through too. You can always come to the website and get that sort of information. So if anyone would like to know more about anything, I think I've put the poll up on the screen. So please do let us know if you want more information about any aspects of what we do in Actus. Anyone's got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will send out the slides and the slides to you probably later today or tomorrow, if they're useful to you. Let's just check. Right, I've just relaunched the poll because I couldn't see any responses. So if anyone can use the poll, please do. Thank you. For some reason it wasn't working for me. Thanks so much for joining. Hope to see you at future webinars. If there's any suggestions for future topics you want me to cover or any other questions, I'll stay on for a while. I'm going to stop the video and I'll be here. Stop the recording rather. Yeah.